They thought they could bleed me dry to rescue their golden child. When my parents raised my rent to $1,900 a month just to keep my brother's sinking business afloat, everyone told me to suck it up because family comes first. They expected me to bow my head, hand over my hard-earned money, and quietly finance a disaster I had no part in creating. I signed the revised lease agreement in silence, letting them believe they had successfully backed me into a corner. They shared a triumphant smile, convinced they'd outsmarted me once again. But their smirks completely vanished 3 weeks later when a senior fraud investigator from the bank called me directly on speakerphone, asking why my father's signature was on a $250,000 commercial loan taken out in my name. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name's Clara, I'm 28 years old, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had a decent relationship with my parents. I worked hard as a staff accountant, kept my head down, and paid my bills on time. To save money for a down payment on a place of my own, I moved into the renovated guest cottage behind my parents' house in suburban Sacramento. It was a win-win situation, or so I thought. I paid them $900 a month in rent, which was fair for the space, and it gave them a steady stream of extra income. Then came Julian, my 24-year-old younger brother. Julian was the undisputed golden child of the family. While I had worked my way through college with 2 jobs, Julian's passions were fully funded by my parents. His latest endeavor was an upscale, artisanal bistro downtown. The problem? Julian had zero business sense. Within 8 months, the restaurant was bleeding cash, drowning in unpaid supplier invoices and payroll debts. One rainy Tuesday evening, my mother texted me asking if I'd come to the main house for a family emergency dinner. When I sat down at the dining table, the atmosphere was suffocating. Julian sat across from me, sipping expensive wine and staring at his phone, while my father smoothed out a piece of paper on the table. Clara, my father began, skipping any small talk. Julian's business is facing a temporary liquidity crisis. As a family, we all have to make sacrifices. Effective next month, your rent for the cottage will be $1,900. I stared at my father, convinced I had misheard him. $1,900 a month? That was more than double what I was currently paying, and well above market rate for a studio cottage with a leaky roof and outdated appliances. Dad, that's ridiculous, I said, my voice rising. I'm an accountant. I know market rates. A 1-bedroom downtown doesn't even cost that much. Why am I being penalized for Julian's financial failures? My mother's face instantly hardened, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. This isn't a penalty, Clara. It's family solidarity. Your brother is building a dream, and you're sitting back counting pennies. Family protects family. You have a stable corporate job, while Julian is risking everything. Julian finally looked up from his phone, smirking as he took another slow sip of his wine. Honestly, Clara, it's not that big of a deal. You make good money. Consider it an investment in the family brand. An investment in a sinking ship, I shot back, turning to my father. Dad, you can't just arbitrarily double my rent because his payroll bounced. My father set his glass down hard on the table, the sharp clack echoing off the walls. It's my property, Clara. If you don't like the new terms, you're welcome to pack your bags and move out tomorrow. But as long as you live under my roof or behind it, you'll contribute to keeping this family afloat. He slid a newly printed lease agreement across the mahogany table toward me. It was an ultimatum, wrapped in false concern. If I moved out immediately, my savings would take a massive hit on short notice. I needed time to set my next move in motion. Looking directly into my father's eyes, I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. They exchanged a subtle, triumphant smile, completely convinced they'd forced me into submission. They thought they had won. 3 weeks passed, and I kept my head down, quietly paying the inflated $1,900 rent check while I secretly searched for a new apartment. My parents treated me with a sickening kind of victory lap warmth, while Julian strutted around the main house like he'd personally saved the family empire. I let them enjoy their little illusion. Then came a Thursday morning that changed everything. I was sitting at my desk at work, deep in an audit spreadsheet, when my cell phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed a toll-free number labeled National Commercial Bank. Expecting a routine fraud alert or an automated survey, I answered. "Hello, Clara speaking." "Good morning, Miss Clara," a stern, professional voice replied. "My name is Richard Sterling. I'm a senior investigator with the Risk Management and Commercial Fraud Division at National Commercial Bank. Am I speaking with the primary owner of Clara's Consulting LLC?" My hand froze over my keyboard. "I don't own an LLC," I said, my pulse instantly quickening. "I'm a staff accountant." There was a long silence on the line, followed by the sound of papers rustling. "Miss Clara, we are currently reviewing an application for a $250,000 small business expansion loan submitted 3 days ago under your name, personal tax ID, and financial profile. The loan lists you as the primary guarantor." The air left my lungs. "I never applied for any loan." "That is what we suspected," Mr. Sterling said smoothly. "The application used your recent rental agreement of $1,900 as proof of high-value personal real estate income. But what caught our system's attention was the secondary signature. Your father, Arthur, signed as the managing agent. Does he have power of attorney over your finances?" "No," I whispered, blood rushing to my ears. "He doesn't." "Miss Clara, are you still there?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "I'm here," I managed to say, leaning against my desk to steady myself. "Mr. Sterling, I swear to you, I have not signed any loan documents. I didn't even know an application existed." "I understand," he replied calmly. "Because of the high dollar amount and several red flags on the application, this file was flagged for manual review. Given your profession as an accountant, I strongly advise you to come to our regional office today. We need to go over these files together." An hour later, I was sitting in a quiet, glass-walled conference room on the 10th floor of the downtown bank building. Mr. Sterling slid a thick manila folder across the polished table. As I flipped through the pages, my stomach churned with a mixture of horror and cold rage. It was worse than I could have imagined. My father hadn't just forged my signature on a single $250,000 loan application. Over the past 6 months, he and Julian had used my personal tax documents, credit profile, and social security number, which my parents had stored in their safe from when I was younger, to construct an elaborate financial web. They had registered a fraudulent shell company in my name, using it as a back-channel guarantor to secure short-term credit lines and keep Julian's failing bistro afloat. The inflated $1,900 lease agreement I'd signed 3 weeks ago was the final piece of their puzzle. They needed proof of stable, high-value rental income under my profile to trigger the bank's final loan approval. "They didn't just borrow money in your name," Mr. Sterling explained, pointing to a highlighted ledger. "If this business defaults, you would be personally on the hook for every penny." I looked at the forged signatures, my father's handwriting clumsily mimicking mine. My shock rapidly hardened into absolute clarity. "I want copies of everything," I told Mr. Sterling, looking him dead in the eye. "Every form, every transfer log, every signature. I'm going to handle this." 2 days later, I invited my parents and Julian over to the main house under the guise of paying my next month's rent. The dining room was filled with an air of celebration. Julian had brought a bottle of expensive champagne, boasting about how a major new investor was about to inject $250,000 into his bistro. My father smiled warmly, pouring for glasses. "You see, Clara, everything works out when the family sticks together. Your extra rent gave us the breathing room we needed." I sat across from them, keeping my hands resting calmly on the table. "Actually, Dad, I didn't bring my rent check tonight. I brought something else." I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick manila folder, and dropped it onto the center of the mahogany table with a heavy, deliberate thud. My mother frowned. "What is this?" "More accounting paperwork." "Open it," I said softly. Julian smirked, casually pulling the folder toward him and slipping out the first document. The color drained from his face instantly. The smug smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. "Julian, what is it?" my father asked, his voice tightening as he snatched the papers from his son's shaking hands. "That is a formal audit from National Commercial Bank's Fraud Division. I explained, leaning back in my chair. Along with an official police report for identity theft, forgery, and commercial loan fraud. Turns out your major new investor was actually a $250,000 fraudulent loan taken out in my name, using my forged signature and the $1,900 lease agreement you forced me to sign. My father stared at the document, his lips trembling as the room went dead silent. The illusion of their happy victory collapsed in a single second. "What did you do?" My father exploded, slamming his hands on the table, though his voice shook with terrifying realization. "You reported your own father to the police? You committed felony fraud against your own daughter," I countered, my voice icy and level. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice a $250,000 liability attached to my social security number?" My mother burst into tears, gasping for breath. "Clara, please. Julian will go to prison. Your father could lose everything. We did this for the family." "No, you did this for Julian," I said, standing up from the table. "And in doing so, you were entirely willing to destroy my credit, my career as an accountant, and my financial future before it even started." The bank acted with ruthless efficiency. By 9 o'clock the next morning, every account connected to Julian's business was frozen. The fraudulent loan application was formally canceled, and the existing line of credit was immediately recalled. Without the cash infusion, Julian's bistro collapsed like a house of cards. Within 48 hours, high-end food distributors showed up with moving trucks to repossess equipment, and his landlord served an immediate eviction notice. My father spent the next week frantically meeting with criminal defense attorneys, trying to mitigate the looming charges of identity theft and bank fraud. The comfortable life they had built was unraveling at the seams, all because they believed I was too weak to stand up to them. I packed my belongings from the guest cottage into a moving truck that weekend. As I loaded the final box, my father stood on the porch, his shoulders slumped, looking 20 years older. "You destroyed this family," he whispered, refusing to look me in the eye. "You destroyed it the moment you decided I was collateral damage," I replied, closing the truck door for good. I moved into a sunlit one-bedroom condo downtown, located just 10 minutes from my office. The rent was reasonable, the space was entirely mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt true peace when I walked through my front door. Over the next few months, the dust slowly settled. Facing overwhelming evidence and potential prison time, my father accepted a plea deal that involved heavy financial restitution and probation, effectively wiping out his retirement savings to avoid jail. Julian's bistro went into full liquidation, leaving him with a mountain of personal debt and no choice but to take a minimum wage job to pay off his suppliers. My mother tried calling me several times to guilt-trip me into helping them pay off their legal fees, but I promptly blocked her number. Standing up to my parents was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the moment I reclaimed my life. I learned that loyalty shouldn't mean sacrificing your own future to fund someone else's greed, and that blood doesn't give anyone the right to destroy you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have turned in your own family to protect your future, or would you have tried to handle it differently? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories. Thank you for watching.